Okay, so really excited to hear your talk on behalf of a whole series of creative and also critical folks.
Yeah, yeah. Alrighty. So I just wanted to start by first acknowledging Ghana Mayuna as the traditional custodians of Tandana, which is the traditional name for the Adelaide Plains, which is where this work was conducted. And I recognise their cultural heritage beliefs and continuing connection to this unceded land. So this presentation describes the outcomes of a workshop that I led on revisionist adaptations, which is what I'm currently doing my PhD on. And I did it with the Critically Creative Reading and Writing Collective, specifically the members who are listed at the bottom of this slide. And just to be mindful of time, I apologize. We're not really going to get into the actual creative work that these talented people have done, but more towards the outcomes of what that writing revealed as part of this workshop. And yeah, CCRWC is a university-based collective who share an interest in creative methodologies for investigating cultural issues, particularly those of social justice. And we meet regularly to read and create together as a sort of break from the hustle and bustle of the neoliberal academy. So, approaching adaptation from a specifically revisionist perspective engages a form of critical thinking focused on identifying subaltern perspectives that are minimized, misrepresented, or omitted from an established text. Rewriting these narratives to better incorporate representations of minorities that are lacking involves a creative form of problem solving, encouraging us to interrogate the normativity perpetuated by some stories and consider ways to rewrite more inclusively ourselves. So, that was the focus of the workshop. For the main writing activity, we used Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland as a shared base text, and each wrote a creative response to a section of it. So we wrote for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we shared and discussed our work as we reflected on points of similarity, difference, and connection. And it was through these comparisons that we came to deeper understandings of our own intersecting but distinct relationships to multiple axes of social privilege and marginalisation. Amelia rewrote a Mad Tea Party with the aim to recenter the perspectives of the mad characters, thereby addressing discrimination against people living with mental illness. And in Amelia's revision, she unexpectedly took up the point of view of the dormouse because they are the most silent and silenced creature in the original. And Amelia found the character's desire to always sleep relatable to her experience and sought to express the beauty and validity in what is considered zoning out as related to chrononormativity, which is the enforcement of dominant Western and linear notions of time on people who don't want it but must abide by it. So Amelia identified with this perhaps overlooked aspect of how bigotry is enforced. Time also came up in response from other members, for example, Chloe's Big and Pepper piece. Chloe maintained the absurdism of that scene from the original Wonderland, where a chaotic kitchen encounter ends with a baby turning into a pig. And Chloe explored what it means to be a young single mother through that reworking, particularly in a world where there is an ascribed right way of constructing the nuclear family within a specific timeline of life events. And the excerpt that's on the screen relates to the attempts society makes on enforcing strict binaries between adulthood and childhood and how becoming a parent means abandoning the inner child. And growing up was also a theme in Evan's response, which adapted from the chapter where Alice is struggling to fit in Wonderland. And Evan's adaptation updates this problem to the contemporary world where the character Jamie attempts to escape the expectations of impending adulthood. And Jamie is described as a neurodivergent misfit whose mum sort of pushes her to find work in the city. So Evan's response explores the violence of capitalism and Jamie's anxieties about being the problem in a world that is inherently unfair and unjust. Anne addressed the pool of tears, again speaking of expectations, but for children rather than teenagers or adults. The injustice of being a child is already evident in the original Wonderland, where Alice compares herself to Mabel, a girl that she knows, and in her dialogue provides evidence that her thoughts are already conforming to societal expectations and measures of personal value. So Anne questioned this in her creative response from an outsider's perspective. So Alice asserts herself over Mabel based on intelligence and speaks without regard for others. And Anne's response considers the alternate perspectives of characters around Alice, as did my own writing, which was on the same chapter. So my revisionist take on Pool of Tears reframed Alice's faux pas with the mouse as a commentary on the concept of white woman tears, where the perceived vulnerability of white women and their at times weaponized victimization is given greater validity and importance than actual threats to the safety of minority communities. Another pillar of whiteness, Lily's revisionist adaptation used motifs from the Queen's Croquet Ground to take aim at an institution of privilege and colonial heritage. The British monarchy has benefited from colonial wealth accumulation and systems of racial capital, and the legacy of this was on show at the coronation of King Charles and all the pageantry that accompanied it that Lily wrote to. So in Lily's work, we see an interpretation of Alice as a protester. And this was also present in the reimagining of Alice as an agent of protest and activism in Stef's work. Funnily enough, Stef came into the workshop unaware of what the base text for this exercise would be, and yet had a revisionist adaptation of Wonderland that they were already working on, which gave them the advantage of having already considered changes that could offer a critique from it. So wanting to use a Deleuzian approach to explore their own vegan identity, in Stef's adaptation, Alice becomes Ice, who's a transmasculine hero, and who takes up a leadership role in an Extinction Rebellion type of movement. Utilizing their pre-written work in this progress, Stef fleshed out a side character from their original story by writing from Butterfly's point of view. And the transformation of the butterfly prevents the story from painting the trans experience with broad strokes by presenting the reader with a personal perspective of one trans character comparing themselves to another. This diversity of queer lived experience is continued in Stef's second piece they completed during the workshop, inspired by the Mock Turtle story, where they turned the central characters of this chapter, the Griffin and the Mock Turtle, into two old geezers at the bar, named Griff and Mark, incorporating ideas of intergenerational difference and connections of community. There was also an element of activism in Carina's approach to Wonderland, rewriting the scene where Alice speaks to the caterpillar about the mushrooms that make her grow and shrink. And the perspective has shifted in Carina's work to that of the surrounding environment. This post-humanist reframing of a scene from Wonderland inspired a brief script describing a battle between the destructive mechanical world and non-human beings found in nature. So the burning wastelands must fight back here, where we see how the initial prompt influences the writer in unexpected ways that aren't necessarily evocative of the base text that inspired them, but are nonetheless connected. In a similar way, Lyndal continued a common thread from the warm-up exercise where she wrote from Waiting for Godot. And so in the second exercise, reinvented Godot as a cross-fertilization, blending the tea party and the scene where the rabbit is telling everyone to hurry up or they'll be late. So here, Lyndal interrogates the notion that sensical norms are justified in their claims of correctness. The visual description of the scene is somewhat removed from the connection to the human figures. There is a lack of action, of agency, of explanation. There's a subversion of generic fictional writing following a set structure that in itself is a breaking of norms. And yet, there's also an anxiety in the passive waiting of Mary that she is helpless to assuage because it is inflicted on her from an external societal source. While we do not know what the discriminating force is in Lyndal's piece, we can feel its presence in their everyday life. So while all of our writing was connected by this thread of challenging or rejecting normativity, our approaches varied. The prevalence of themes relating to the timing of life events and expectedness of social roles was surprising for such an open-ended prompt where writers could really do whatever they wanted with it. And yet these responses weave together notions of chromonormativity as a tool that upholds systems of power that result in specific types of bigotry, in this case related to classism, ageism, and neurodiversity. Other responses highlighted the importance of collective power in social justice activism and solidarity between and within community groups. An intersectional approach to the dismantling of hegemonic systems was supported by the appearance of creative responses that discussed anti-monarchy sentiments, racial bias, queer experiences, and environmental activism. The responses also engaged with expressions of anxiety felt by individuals as a direct result of societal pressures related to normativity. One solution presented in the creative works was seeking out community and connection to alleviate some of this pressure, which was a fitting theme to appear in a CCRWC workshop as a collective built on sort of mutual support. So workshops like this one offer strategies for writers, artists, and researchers looking to challenge bigotry and related forms of injustice in and beyond academic settings. The potential benefit of revisionist adaptation lies in its flexibility and variability of approaches suited to individual interests united by a common progressive goal. When practiced in a collaborative group setting, it initiates conversations about imagined worlds that are more inclusive and accepting, stemming from our differences of experience and perspective that will always shape our artistic practice, and meeting at the intersections of our identities and beliefs. Utilised as a subversive or radical tool, revisionist adaptation encourages a critical rethinking of canonical texts and social norms they reinforce. And that's my presentation.
Oh, thank you so much, Dante. There's so much in that presentation for us to unpack. I feel like we could talk
Truly.
all day. Really, really fascinating. I've already written some questions that I'm keen to ask at the end of the session.